Okay, my prompt says the webinar has started, so hopefully that's true.
Great. Thank you all. Welcome to the Curriculum Committee, Policy Committee Joint Working Group this morning of the Board of Education. I'm Rachel Gilliar, and I'm the chair of the Board Curriculum Committee. Deborah Brooks is the chair of the Policy Committee, and she and I will be chairing this committee together. So this morning we're talking about gifted education. This is a conversation that Deborah and I have been wanting to have since she joined the board 2 years ago. This is a conversation I've been wanting to have since I joined the board 4 years ago, when my oldest children were only in second grade, and I carried my youngest on my hip into meetings. And this is a conversation Deborah and I've both been wanting to have when we were just parents and not even board members. I suspect there are going to be members of our community here today who've been advocating for this even further back than that. As a parent, I attended previous conversations about gifted education, and I know the air for the parents in those conversations was always thick with the suspicion that PEP was on the chopping block again, and that was the only reason that the board and the administration would be discussing it. That suspicion was a fog that made it difficult to have an open conversation on gifted education. So I want to make this very clear today before we start. Plans are underway for PEP, or ESTEAM as we started calling it last year, to be reinstated next year exactly as it was in the 2019-20 school year. Some of the testing has been delayed because of COVID issues, but it will happen. And I know the administration is also in the process of hiring a replacement for the PEP teacher who retired this year. When I ran for the board, again, 4 years ago, one of the things that I talked about was wanting to see the relationship between parents and the administration be more collaborative and less antagonistic. The issue we're talking about today, gifted education, has been antagonistic in the past, and I want today to be the day that we're all able to leave that behind. We will open for public comments and questions, and I know parents have been frustrated by this issue, but I ask that we all keep the tone respectful and collaborative. I want to thank Dr. Hines and Dr. Mioli for also wanting to have an open conversation on this issue. As you know, there is a committee currently underway to create a vision and mission statement for the district. As you also hopefully know, the Board of Education does not decide on curriculum. We leave that to the educators. But we do have a role to play partnering with the administration to think about the big picture of the district. Our plan for this today is to be a forward-thinking conversation to talk about what gifted education is, look at our current policy on gifted education, and to set the stage for what Port Washington wants it to be in the future. And I believe that conversation will continue once the vision and mission statement are complete. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Mioli, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, who will be giving us an overview of the topic of gifted education and will give you a summary of the consultant's report on Port Washington's gifted program that was commissioned by the board in the 2016-2017 school year. Except I see Deborah signaling me because I forgot to do the pledge. So we're going to do the pledge, and then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Mioli.
Everybody could please stand. And Laura Johnson has the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you.
You want to take roll call to see who's here, or?
I just forgot all the details.
Okay.
Pat, do you want to take the roll call?
Sure. Okay, Rachel Gilliar.
Here.
Larry Greenstein.
Here.
Deborah Brooks.
Here.
Nora Johnson.
Here.
Beth Weisberg.
Here.
Okay, Emily Bays.
Emily is not here. She let us know
No.
that she would.
Okay, and Julie Epstein.
Here.
Okay.
And Rachel, you mentioned that we will take public comments at the end.
Yes.
Okay.
So good morning. I am going to, as Rachel said, I'm going to just give a brief overview of gifted and talented education. And try to tie it in, as I have been in all these curriculum committee meetings, curriculum, and even the last one was a joint policy committee meeting as well. Tie it into the curriculum, instruction, and assessment workshops that we've talked about all year, and also tie it into our mission and vision work, since that is really where we're trying to align all our arrows. So I'm just going to hopefully share my screen. And let's see. You are screen sharing. Okay. So am I good?
You're
All right.
perfect.
So this is a joint committee of the board curriculum committee and the board policy and personnel committee. So as I like to do with every topic that we talk about here, I like to discuss and talk about what are we talking about? Define our terms. So what is giftedness and what is talent? And I think there are different views of it. For me, a gift is more innate and a talent can be developed. I'll just give you a brief example. When I was in high school, I was in an orchestra in the Greater Boston Youth Orchestra, and there was a student there who had perfect pitch. And so I was very taken with that because it's something that I think is great to have as a musician. Tried to teach it to myself, did my master's dissertation on it. And in any event, I think for me, something that is a gift is something that's like more innate. And as you'll see later, there are actual scientists who do work on this who agree. One of the models. And a talent is something that can be more developed. Sometimes we interchange the word aptitude. So that's one view of it. The National Association for Gifted Children kind of parses it out this way. Gifted learners have outstanding abilities in one or more academic subjects, and talented learners have exceptional abilities in one or more practical subjects. And by that, I think they generally mean something that's non-academic, the arts, particularly sports, something like that. I was going to do a history, but I think I'm just going to give just a little bit of background. One of the first United States reports on gifted and talented education was the Marland Report. It goes back to 1971. And it talked about over and over high achievement capability as what gifted and talented children displayed in school. And earlier this year, Dr. Alyssa Brown gave a great talk about the same topic at an Agate meeting, and she referenced this state law, which terms gifted pupils those who show evidence of high performance, capability, same piece as the Marland Report, and exceptional potential in areas such as general intellectual ability, special academic aptitude, and outstanding ability in visual and performing arts. And so again, you have that reference to the arts, and I think many of you know that that is my background. So historically, I think it's fair to say that gifted and talented education has been associated with verbal precociousness and achievement. That is when we say gifted and talented children, I think the vision that we have in our head is often a student that looks like that. But also often these terms are interchangeable or they're used that way. So that's why I wanted to make sure that we just had a look at what we're talking about. So I want to show you a couple of different models of both giftedness and intelligence. And I do realize that there's a slightly different lens on those two terms as well. But I think it's important, again, to see what some people who have really done scientific inquiry into this topic have found. So this is one of my favorites because it aligns with how I see the world in terms of giftedness and talent. This is Francois Garnier. And so you look on the left, natural abilities are what he calls gifts, and all the way to the right, systemically developed skills are talent. And then in between are all the things that can affect a gift and whether it becomes a talent or not, the environment, the interpersonal pieces, the developmental process, and chance. Probably the most well-known is Renzulli's 3-ring conception of giftedness. He has 3 pieces that overlap, and you can see them there: creativity, above average ability, and task commitment. And when those circles overlapped is where you have gifted behavior. There's more to it than that, but again, I'm just doing a very brief overview. This is Sternberg, triarchic theory of intelligence. And he talks about creative intelligence, practical intelligence. And again, those terms are terms that we saw in the definition from the National Association of Gifted Children. And practical intelligence, sometimes we call street smart, and analytical intelligence. So he looks for those 3 pieces in terms of defining intelligence. Also well known is, just went out of my head and I didn't put it here. Sorry.
Goldman?
Huh?
Gardner?
Thank you,
Gardner.
Howard Gardner.
It's Gardner. Yep.
Thank you. I owe you a save. Multiple intelligences, I think he's up to 9 now. And he talks about, again, aptitudes that need to be developed in very many fields and abilities. And so then when we talk about who we're talking about, we want to talk about how we identify those students. And so the ways that we normally do it are by standardized tests. We do it by looking at performance or high achievement. And again, that goes back to Marlin Report, a number of those, the syntax from those definitions, and teacher evaluation by observation. And often it's a mix of those 3 things. And then finally, we define what we mean. We identify those students, and it may be one group or several groups. And then we talk about what is gifted and talented education. And often it is set in kind of 3 arenas: enrichment, acceleration, and differentiation. And again, we could talk a lot about all 3 of them. I think they're fairly common terms, so I'm just going to let them lie for now. I'm sure in our discussion later, we'll come back to those. So one of the reasons I like to define things is because when we communicate with each other, sometimes we use words and sometimes we don't always know what the other person is thinking when we use those words. And gifted and talented, I tried to show you some lenses on that. And you're going to see later the Van Tassel report that Rachel referenced earlier, which was completed in 2016. And, you know, it talks about the PEP program, but we've actually had a shift since that report in the last 5 years. And our program now has been for several years ESTEAM, or eSTEAM, some people call it by that name. And so I wanted to, for those of you out there in our audience, I wanted you to think about what that means. What does eSTEAM mean to you? I was invited, and Dr. Hines and I spoke at an Agate meeting, the title of which was The Future of eSTEAM in Port Washington. We've built 2 eSTEAM labs in Port Washington and have plans for 3 more. And I've asked this question of a lot of people, and you'd be surprised how many different answers I get on it. Because I'm not sure we really know exactly what eSTEAM stands for. Some people use the first E as empathy, Everybody, I think, knows that STEAM originally started as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. The arts came along and made it STEAM. And then I'm not sure how it became e-STEAM. Some will think that it's empathy and our focus on social emotional learning. Some use the term environment. Some use the term entrepreneurship. If you Google it, you'll find all these things. Some use empowerment. And our Manor Haven lab has a refrigerator and an oven. So I don't know, maybe it's Epicurean, not sure. And you know, I say this with love. Those of you who have watched any of these meetings that I am presenting at, I like to have one little edgy slide in there because I want us to think about what we're talking about. And I think it's important to define our terms and to make sure that when we talk about how we're going to make our programs better, or you know how well we're doing, that we define our terms. Similarly, we all know we have a program in place that's at the elementary level. It actually looks different this year than it has looked in the past because it became a special during COVID, and it's actually worked very well, I think. But we've always historically in Port Washington had a well-defined gifted and talented program, which was normally called PEP, Port Enrichment Program, in grades K through 6. And when we actually sent the 6th grade to team with the then junior high and it became a middle school, that piece stayed. But we don't really have a well-defined gifted and talented program per se at the middle school or at the high school. We have some of the things, and again, the Van Tassel report discusses some of these things, such as acceleration and enrichment, but not a clearly defined program for gifted students or talented programs, talented students. And again, that's not to say that we're not serving those children at all. It's not to cast aspersion on anything that we're doing. Again, you all know, or many of you know, that I was a music teacher, and that I think very highly of the music and art program here. I was the director of arts for a while as well. But in terms of what we're talking about, meeting the needs of gifted and talented students in those areas, we really don't have highly defined programs. And I think that's one of the things that we should be talking about. I think I've gone through all those already. So that's kind of my really brief overview of gifted and talented terminology. I want to kind of go back and just briefly pull a couple of slides from earlier presentations, because again, as we think about curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and how we service the students, I think it's important to look at what we've already seen is best practice in these areas. So in terms of curriculum, those of you who saw that presentation will remember this slide. I used it kind of to show the difference between standards and a curriculum. So this is all the parts we need, but you can't really drive it. And I think in many ways, that's a good way to think about how we need to pull a very specific curriculum together for very specific needs. And that's, again, why I like to make sure that we are defining who we're talking about and what we're talking about. And again, this is one of the slides from that curriculum presentation. And I think it's important to just make sure that we think about this from the student's point of view. As a student, most students who are lucky enough to be here for their entire career will be with us for 13 years. And so we want to map out communal decisions about content, concepts, and skills so that we're serving those students. And to do that, we need to decide what to keep, what to cut, and and put together a program. And again, the Van Tassel report discusses this, and I think it's important to highlight. It includes not only coursework and activities in school, but it really should be a partnership with the home and with outside of school co-curricular and outside of school experiences as well. I wanted to pull this slide from the curriculum presentation as well, because we have seen that there are a number of countries and government agencies that are actually eliminating tracks, eliminating the separation of different abilities of children. And there's pluses and minuses to that. But there have certainly been successes that have been seen by upping the education, the curriculum, the instruction, and assessment for all students. And so, and Finland is certainly one of the best examples of that. And Dr. Liccato gave a great overview of that program during the curriculum presentation. So when I went over instruction, these are exactly the bullets that I talked about when it was just generically talking about instruction. And obviously they apply to gifted and talented instruction as well. So we're looking to meet student needs. And in general, that means to support and to accelerate. And so acceleration, I know that's a whole different topic, but I think it's an important one, and it's one of the ways, especially at the secondary level, that we really do give opportunities for students who can or have the ability to move more quickly and or more deeply into disciplines. The other thing that we talked about in instruction was how much knowledge has increased and how we package that. Engaging students is important, and it's particularly important for gifted students. Keeping high expectations, student assumption of responsibility, and equity and cultural competence and sensitivity. So all those important considerations for instruction are very important for gifted and talented instruction. Also in the instruction presentation, Mr. Ryan gave an overview of how he has been teaching with the Chromebooks in his classrooms for a number of years, thanks to an Ed Foundation grant. And he talked about the benefits, even before COVID, of having that flexibility of having every student have their own device, and the advantages that it gave him then and gives him now. And as you've heard me say, if you've watched any of these presentations, I look forward to us having when COVID is over. One of the, I think, the greatest pluses from this whole pandemic is that we have provided the board and the superintendent have provided every student, every teacher, every paraprofessional with a device, and it's really increased our accessibility, our flexibility, our ability to have students collaborate, the ability of a teacher to differentiate. It's really leveled the playing field, or given us the opportunity to level the playing field, and also to make our students real world ready, because it's really kind of catapulted us into the 21st century. Part of that instructional discussion also was the strength of integrated or interdisciplinary instruction. And we actually had 2 teams of teachers who talked about that. And this, I think, is something that is just so important, that, you know, we are so used to teaching, having our curriculum and our instruction based on disciplines, again, especially at the secondary level. And I think that what we are seeing is the advantage of integrated instruction and interdisciplinary instruction. And as I said, I think during that presentation, if you think about your life, you really don't do science for one day or a couple of hours and then do something else. Everything really becomes integrated when you're dealing with it in the real world. And I think one of the things that Weber does very well is integration, at least among two of the disciplines there. And I think it's something else for us to look into in terms of gifted and talented education. And then Nick Stratweiser and Stephanie gave us an overview of how the whole phys ed curriculum and approach to teaching had changed, instruction had changed over the past 10 years. And unfortunately, I can't go through the whole thing now, but they really upgraded what they were doing from, mostly kind of team sports once or twice a week to a focus on individual development. And I put the Schreiber slide in here only because I had an elementary and middle school slide before it. But at all of the grade levels, they really focused on individual ability and individual development. And they have a graduated curriculum that grows with the child over all their years. And that's why I put that curriculum slide in, the 13 years. And then by the time they get to Schreiber, they have strands that they can choose. They've had a lot of, they've had the ability to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of sports and programs. And then they can choose strands where they specialize in certain areas. And so I think, again, for us, this is a great model of how we might want to look at how we deliver the best instruction to our gifted and talented students. And then because I'm a former music teacher, I had to throw this one in again as well. The nyssma scores, which many people are familiar with, they really allow us to assess students. And so this is the final piece, curriculum instruction assessment. Anyone from a student who's been playing for 5 weeks to a student who is playing at a professional level, using only 2 instruments, because we have different expectations built in to those rubrics, those assessments. And the nyssma the forms have been kind of the gold standard for a long time. I think, again, it's something for us to look at when we talk about how to serve our gifted and talented students and how to set up assessment after, really individualized instruction for our students. And then finally, I said I was going to give a little overview. I was going to tie it into curriculum instruction assessment. And then finally, I always kind of wind down with, where we thankfully are right now, which is working on our vision and mission. I think you can see, there's a lot of great things going on in Port Washington. There's a lot of great things going on in our gifted and talented program. But I think what the vision and mission will give us is that North Star of, what do we want our graduates to look like, all our graduates to look like, and how can we align all of the things that we're doing, including our curriculum, our instruction, and our assessment, to get our kids there. And so I really want to make sure that I show this slide again and have this lens with us as we start the discussion this morning. So that's really it for my presentation. We have, I know, the policy committee end of this, they wanted to have several items up here. So I put in this, we can come back to it if we want, I can put it back up. The current gifted and talented policy that is on the books. I've referenced a number of times the Van Tassel report. Actually, we had a highlights and 10 bullet highlight prepared, and I want to give credit to Donna Valenti, who's a high school teacher who's doing some administrative intern work. She boiled that 80-page document somehow down into 10 really, I think, good, strong bullets. And I don't know if you want me to go through this now or you want to come back to it. I can do either one. But we do have that available for discussion. And then I know that you also had some NYSma policies that you wanted to share as well and talk about. So I'm gonna stop sharing, but I can go back and put those up if you want me to either go through the Van Tassel bullets or any of the other piece of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mihaly. Given the number of years that you were educated to obtain your PhD, I cannot believe the speed with which you educated the rest of us on the overview, and I'm sure there's a lot of depth to each of those. Deborah, do you want to go ahead and go over what our policy is and look at the NYSma sample policy? I don't know that we want to make any changes to it today. So do we want to go over them so we know what they are and then move on to discussion?
Well, what I was thinking, I actually had, you see my background is different. I have to change because my husband's in a court mediation right now, representing somebody. So I had to leave my desktop. The reason that I included the NYSpa documents is to let the district and the public know that NYSpa has been on top of gifted education and has provided a template that when we finish with the mission and vision work, we can refer to that. I just wanted to have it all in one place for this discussion. So unless somebody else needs to, since we're not going to be making changes to the policy now, unless somebody wants to discuss the NYSpa templates, personally, I don't see a need to do that. I wanted it as more of a reference so that people could view it ahead of time, understand that our gifted policy, even though it's from 1993, surprise, isn't really far off. I think it has a lot in there that the updated NYSpa policy has. For example, the recognition that we need to be challenging our students. We have the ability to do that, and we have students who need and want to be challenged. So that's a great box to be able to check off. Also, the fact that whole district enrichment is included in our current policy, which is a great box to check off. The fact that the board is actually committed to allocating resources to the program is in our current policy. It says the board will allocate resources. So to me, that's a great box that can be checked off. And also just periodic review by the superintendent. So I feel as though this year we've done that. Well, at least for the coming year, we've aligned ourselves with the policy. So personally, I feel good about that. I think the issue is more the meat and potatoes of what now this program should be. We have a basic understanding of what it is, but what it should be. So actually the question I wanted to ask our administrators and Dr. Hines is that when everybody is looking at the mission and vision, is gifted and talented or accelerated or whatever we want to call it, going to be a part of that mission and vision? Not do we want it, but is it a part of the mission and vision? And what do we hope for the mission and vision work to accomplish vis-a-vis gifted and talented and accelerated? That's the question I have.
Well, first, good morning, everyone. Great to see everyone. Dr. Mihaly, I thought you gave an unbelievable comprehensive overview that was really, I think, much needed. And it does align, Ms. Brooks, to, I think, the vision and mission work. I think the best way to answer that question right now is the vision and mission work is focusing on, as Dr. Mihaly said before, ultimately looking at a profile of a graduate, which attributes, which skills are non-negotiables for a school district when they exit the school district after 13 years, right? Whether you are gifted, whether you are in special education, whether you are an ENL student, that to me is not looking at one section, it's looking at the school and our students in its totality. That is what we're doing. So if we're looking at it from 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet, where I think we will start, not strike, I know, is when we start on the strategic plan. Once we have the vision and mission done, then we start looking at the nuts and bolts of what this means. So that's probably the best way I can answer that question. Right now, we're looking, as Dr. Mealy said, as our North Star. What are our guiding principles? What are our non-negotiables? And then when it comes to the strategic plan, which we will begin in the late summer, early fall, is when we start focusing on programs and what that looks like. So that's probably the best way I can answer. I don't know, Dr. Mealy, if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think the granular detail of it is that we want all students to succeed, and we want all students to be challenged and to really, there's that zone of proximal development. You want to have every student challenged just beyond where they can reach, because that's really where the best growth is. And we can't do it individually for all 5,000 students every single day, but we can look at how we can align what we're doing, that curriculum instruction assessment, with where we want them to end up, and kind of build backwards a curriculum, a path of little steps that gives each student more ability and more choice to do that. And so, one of the things I love about what Ms. Joannan and now Nick Stratweiser have done and are doing is they really just reimagined the whole phys ed piece. And I think, again, overlapping with after school and co-curricular, I think if you think about sports, gifts, and talents, I think there are a lot of opportunities in the sports and in health and in phys ed, and in strength training and in all of those pieces that they've put together. I wish and I hope that we can think about gifted education and talent and students with talent as well that way.
So as a follow-up question then, does that mean that the STEAM/PEP program will remain as it is for the foreseeable future until that mission and vision work is completed and you work backwards to change it or not change it?
Yeah, as far as next year is concerned, we're going back to the way we had it before, but I do think it's incredibly important, and not just for our gifted and talented program, but for all our programs, is to really assess and fine tune and augment, if need be, the programs that we have. And so by restoring it to the way it was, that's the first step in doing so. And we're happy to report that.
Let me just add on to that a little bit too, because I should have mentioned it in the presentation, but I didn't. Our program is a great program. So again, one of the things that we keep talking about in mission and vision is not fixing something, not fixing the present, but reimagining the future and embracing the future and seeing how much better it could be. So for me, and this is just my opinion, I started with it and I guess we're not done yet, but I'll put it in the middle. I would like to see us challenge more kinds of gifts and talents. As a former music teacher, again, we have a great music department, a great art department, but I think there are ways that I know that there are ways that we could challenge students with those gifts and aptitudes and talents better than we do. And also children who don't, or who are not manifesting them right away, by introducing them earlier, and again, more rigorously, and thinking through where we want those kids to end up.
I don't want to hog the discussion. I I don't, oh, Larry, I see a hand up. Okay.
Well, okay, my first question is, do we have students who have absolutely no gifts or talents?
That's not a rhetorical question, I know, coming from you, Larry. Everyone does. I think the trick is, and what we need to do better, because that's what we try to do, we continuously improve, is maximize the potential and talents of all of our students. And how do we go about doing that?
Right, so when we're talking about gifted and talented, in broader strokes, we're talking about giving every student what it is that they need. As I said, we should have 5,400 students with IEPs. Everybody should get a program directly tailored for them. That isn't practical. But I think what we're talking about in gifted and talented are people who have academic gifts. We're looking at test scores, we're looking at grades, we're looking at things. We're looking at people who are motivated. If somebody has a real talent in skateboarding, they're not being, that isn't being nurtured in the schools. If somebody, there's certain talents and gifts that we deem to be better than other talents and gifts. And I think that that's where we really need to be looking. We have to sort of broaden that up and have more, again, as Dr. Mioli said, and you've been saying, Dr. Hines, we have to look for more gifts and more talents and design programs around it. And it's more than just acceleration. It's more than just enrichment. It's also the feeling that you're not alone, the feeling that people care about you and care about your gifts and your talents. And the emotional supports, I think, are an incredibly important part of any program that we develop. And I think we don't have like any dedicated mental health people for our esteem program. I know we don't have anybody who's just works on the social and emotional needs of that group. We don't, and there are plenty of reasons why we don't. But I think as we're looking at this, we have to sort of look at differentiating that also, because I think the social and emotional needs of different groups of people are probably handled very differently if we want them to be successful, and we want every student not only to be successful in school, but to be confident in school and happy in school. Because who wants successful, miserable people? We have enough of those in the world.
And I just pick up on that skateboard example because I love it. And again, there's no, there's no magic bullets here. If there were, Dr. Hines and I would write a book and retire and go on the road. But there are trends and there are things that we've seen that we know work well. And again, some of our teachers are doing these, but we're not doing it as an institution. So the skateboarding example, when you think of a kid on a skateboard in high school, you might not think of somebody, who's in AP physics. But if you gave them the opportunity to show what they know on a skateboard in terms of how vectors come into play and on various, turns, and that's just like off the top of my head. If we start thinking interdisciplinary wise, if we start thinking project-based wise, if we start thinking about real world applications, and I shouldn't say start thinking about again, there are scores of teachers doing this, but they're doing it independently. They're doing it on their own. And we need to have that kind of thinking as an institution, and we need to be capturing that kind of work in ways that other people can use it. And that's really where those arrows start to align.
Exactly. I mean, so we do have 5,400 gifted and talented children. What we're talking about here is a subset of that. And I think maybe we need to define the terms better or change the terms as we're looking for what we're doing. We may have a program for academically gifted kids. We may have a program for musically talented kids. We may have a program for athletically talented kids. We may have a program for socially talented kids. So I think right now we're just sort of using a term that applies to everybody, and then as a practical matter, applying it to a very small subgroup of those people.
If I can add something here, it's interesting. First, Larry, one of the things I value about you most as a board member is you always throw out these things that nobody else has mentioned or thought about it. There's always a new perspective coming out of you. So, I said at the beginning, I've been thinking about this for years, but I never thought about the idea of whether or not we should also be differentiating our mental health professionals. And you're right. If we're serving kids, we should be thinking about all their needs for all the kids. And social emotional learning is something we've said is a priority. So I don't know that we can afford it, but I love it. And maybe, maybe we can afford it just with some extra training for teachers. The other thing that I do want to note, though, as we proceed is I think we do have 5,500 children with gifts and talents, but we don't necessarily have 5,500 capital G, capital T, gifted and talented students. Just the way we have 5,500 kids who all have some special needs, lowercase s, lowercase n, but we don't have 5,500 capital S, capital N special needs children who are entitled to the additional support based on whatever they need. And of course, the thing we haven't mentioned yet is somewhere in there, we have a subset of children that will be served better with all of this forward planning we're talking about, who are twice exceptional children, who are capital S, capital N special needs, and capital G, capital T, gifted and talented. So I think I loved what you said, Dr. Mioli, about reimagining the future. I want to note again, I know I said it in the beginning, but for a lot of the parents who've been watching these conversations, they hear reimagining and they think, oh no, they're going to cancel this program again. Money's tight, they're going to roll it back. And I want to be clear again, that's not what this conversation is about. And I personally appreciate so much both you, Dr. Mioli, and Dr. Hines, in the fact that you are forward-thinking, progressive educators who are being very brave and saying, let's look at what we have. Let's take a really close look and see if we can take something that's good, look at if we're serving everybody that we want to be serving with it, and see how it can be even better. So as I understand, the vision and the mission are going to be more of an overview. But and the wording is not done, I'm on that committee, the wording is not done, but I can tell you a lot of the words I'm hearing in that committee. And when you're talking about challenging every child to the, just past their limit, you're talking about serving every child. And that includes the capital G, capital T, gifted and talented children, along with every other child that we would define in every other way.
I don't see any hand raised, so I wanted to add, I think that, there are kids in the district who are great skiers, and there are kids in the district who play ice hockey. Were that to be part of the curriculum that's handed to us by New York State, I could understand it if parents would be upset if we weren't developing those talents. But I think within the answer, Dr. Mioli, that you provided, that using that outside experience to bring it into the classroom to help augment something they've learned in a curricular program, I thought was brilliant. I don't expect us to, build a skateboard ramp. It would be nice. It would be great if New York State could mandate, some of those things, but they don't. So I just wanted to say, I think we do have to keep this within the realm of what is required to happen within the classrooms, what we are required to teach, and then how do we teach that to the various students we're tasked with serving. So I wanted to ask, with the mission and vision, is there any commitment on the part of the district to have professional development for teachers to further their abilities to differentiate students in the classroom, to identify students in the classroom? I've always thought beginning in kindergarten, sometimes the kids who act out the most are the ones who unfortunately get disciplined, when really it's a cry for help because they're so bright that they just don't know what to do with themselves anymore. And they're still kind of not able to control themselves because at 5, their impulse control is not particularly developed. And a teacher will tag that student as a problem student rather than as a student who is gifted or talented and needs a different type of intervention or attention. So I'm wondering, is there a commitment to help teachers, number one, differentiate in the classrooms, and two, to identify these kids in a way that doesn't involve tests? Because also some of the really gifted kids don't necessarily perform well on a standardized test, which is the major gatekeeper in this district.
I think you have about 4 questions in there. Let's see.
Always.
Let me go backwards and start with the test. So, ironically for me, I've spent about the last 2 months doing somersaults trying to figure out how to, and this I hope will be relevant to a good deal of our audience, trying to figure out how to move forward still during a pandemic with our IQ testing. Because in the past we've had a limited number of psychologists who have come into the building and administer them. You know, they are not willing to, still not willing to do that under these circumstances. So I've been looking at a number of other ways to get the IQ test done, and we will have a resolution to that shortly. But, you know, in terms of if we could look at other tests and open up what we do, yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'd like to have us look at. So again, I know there's probably at least a couple of people out there cringing because their kids do really well on IQ tests. And certainly, as I said earlier, and I don't think I'm totally wrong, you know, our image when we talk about gifted kids, many of us tend to think about kids who would generally do well on IQ tests. I mean, that's kind of where that whole thing came from. And that's not to say, again, that it's the only one. But yeah, I would love to get away from those, and I would love to have more of what, again, we've already done. The PEP teachers, and I'm calling them that on purpose, they have worked very hard to try to broaden that base, to move slightly away from the definition of a gifted child as somebody who gets a 130 on that test. That would be 2.2% of the population by definition. And so we've included a nonverbal test over the years. We've included teacher evaluations. We've included other forms of assessment. And I think there's a lot more we can do to that. And that's why I went through the whole thing in terms of definitions. We really haven't defined what we mean by gifted and or talented. And I think we need to start with that. And I would hope we would have several definitions. There have been earlier discussions on this topic, and I think the special ed model is something to look at. There are well-defined areas of classification for students, and I think we might do that with gifts and talents as well, and maybe have several well-defined categories of gifts and talents that we can look at differently and approach differently instructionally. I've said this before, but I think it's worth saying that I think it's my experience that and again, I don't think I'm alone, that many people don't have every gift at all at the highest level. Some people, you know, have more of a gift in the verbal and less in math. You know, some are very gifted and have both. Some, you know, so when we talk about gifted and talented, that's why it's so important for us to kind of parse that out a little bit more so that we can have curriculum instruction assessment that matches where they go. Where did you start? Because I lost the first part of your question. I'm sorry.
I started with wondering if our teachers and staff, whether it's paraprofessional, whoever, are tasked with, and whether it's music or art or even physical education, just to say, hey, mom, dad, guardian, do you know that your kid is really good at X? Flagging it for the parents, so the parents can maybe provide outside school support as well. violin, whatever it happens to be, but also within school, is our staff, anyone tasked with watching out for particular talents or interests in the kids? I guess it's a differentiation issue, but also keeping an eye on the kids and really watching what they do and how they do it. I know that when the district was talking about initially how we were going to go all in at the elementary school level, and it was going to be departmentalized. And one of the, I think one of the issues, one of the concerns was, well, you won't have one teacher who can get the whole picture of these little people throughout the course of a day and really be able to understand where they're strong and where they're not strong and serve them accordingly. So that to me said, they're trying to watch out for the strength of the whole child. And I'm just wondering if that goes even further to identifying particular strengths and weaknesses and flagging them.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I almost put it in my presentation, but I was hoping it would come up here. So what we're talking about really is professional development. And we're talking about it for all of the people who interact with children. And yes, the answer to your question is there's a reason why our PEP teachers are certified in gifted and talented education, because there are parameters that are well known that one needs to attend to when you're teaching, I'm going to say those populations or that population, depending on how you define it. Similarly, again, and I'll just digress shortly a little bit, is in special ed. They have a very specialized certification as well. And so teachers like me who do not have that certification have a lot to learn in terms of how we interact with children and how we notice or don't notice things that are going on. So the staff development is so important. Anybody who knows anything about me knows that this has been one of my biggest pushes all my years at Sousa, all my years as Director of Creative Arts, because teaching is still such an isolated profession. You know, in most instances, you close the door and you're with a small group of children, either all day or for a part of the day, and your interaction with other adults is limited. And so the professional development, and by that I mean, there teachers and other educators' ability to share their experiences, to teach each other, and also to go to classes and get certifications and do that is really important. And it's something that we don't often value, because when push comes to shove, when we're looking at that budget piece, what do we give up first? And again, that's not an indictment of anybody. It's just the fact. If you have to decide whether to let go of a teacher or provide professional, development, more professional development, there are priorities. So I know, I can tell you without any question that once our vision and mission is in place, when we start to talk about the strategic plan, one of the most important pieces is going to be professional development, because I know that we are going to want to look at everything differently. And again, that doesn't mean that everything's broken, we need to fix it, but I know that we want to have a paradigm shift in terms of how we look at disciplines and how we look at children and in how we look at growth, and how we look at failure, by the way. I know we don't like to talk about failure in the gifted and talented presentation, but it's actually one of the biggest issues, I think, in education, is that we kind of dance around making sure that our kids don't fail. We bend over backwards, and I was as guilty as anyone. I got 2 kids, and we can go down that road for a different dissertation. But yes, professional development is really key, and it's really key for all the adults. And just one more piece, and then I think I missed your middle question. I think you had at least 3 in there. But, one of the things that I like about the ruler approach is that what they ask you to do is to train all of the adults to interact with kids first. It's social emotional, but it recognizes that, hey, who's with the kids during lunch? The paras. Who's with the kids, when they're having problems or they need to, put their notes in, or the nurses and the secretaries. So yes, that's a critical piece of how we look at our institution and how we reimagine the institution of school here in Port Washington.
I just want to note on the professional development angle, one of the things that I've heard Larry say, he's always the one to make this point over the years, is that he wishes that we would build our program every year by you coming to us, you, the administration, to the board, since the board is on the budget end, and saying, this is what we need. The kids need this. And then we have to figure out how to fund it. And there are always going to be budgetary constraints and practical realities, but I just want to put in my plug here. I think sometimes people don't think of professional development or facilities or things like this as being part of the education. But to me, it's the infrastructure that makes the education better. When our facilities are in good shape, nobody has to worry about the facility. They can just focus on the education. And when we pour our resources into professional development, we're really pouring our resources into making the teachers better. And I agree with you completely that we should have more methodical curriculum, but the curriculum is only as good as the teacher who is teaching it. And the teacher who's teaching it can actually make it better. And so pouring our resources into teachers always makes sense to me. Did you want to answer Deborah's hidden third question?
I think he
That's
doesn't
your
know.
call.
You mean about identifying kids within the classroom, just being able to differentiate, but also being able to identify talents that the teacher, because the teacher is on the front line in the classroom, or the para, or whoever happens to be there, has the benefit of seeing the child 6 hours a day in the terms of elementary school. Whether our teachers have been tasked, I think, as a practice, not individual teachers, but as a philosophy within the district, to watch for talents that the kids have and to try to help identify them. All kids within their curricular program.
Yeah, I'll try to be short on this one. Yes, honestly, I think that goes on a lot. And again, I've been in the district a long time in several capacities. I see it every day. I see paras, teachers, custodians, secretaries interacting with kids and making a difference in their lives. And we have good people here. We attract good people. What doesn't happen is we don't institutionalize that. We don't share those. We don't have the ability to make it, to align those arrows and make it all kind of come to where it is. We always go back to, well, okay, I know you needed this time out for a second, but now you got to go back to class and take your test. And there are always kind of those imposed pieces of schooling that I think we need to look at, that kind of end up taking over. And so I think all the things you're talking about happen more than you might think. But we need to not only recognize them, but we need to value them and pull them in as one of those arrows, and not as a sideline, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes, I greatly appreciate that. Does anybody on the board have any questions? If not, I'll turn it over to community comments. Not trying to rush anybody.
I have one, but I can wait until after this community comments. I think we can open it up.
Okay, so I'm going to try. Okay, I see two hands. Lauren King has a hand raised, so hopefully you should be allowed to speak now. Right now there you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Hi, well, thank you, everyone. I am very interested in this topic, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to address it and inviting the community there. So thank you, everyone. I've been doing a lot of my own research as somebody who has a child who's, in 3rd grade and looking forward to hopefully being in the PEP program next year. A couple things that I'm just curious about when it comes to defining gifted. I feel like through a lot of the research I've done and spoken with Agate and everyone, is that there seems to be very clear definitions regarding gifted with the capital G, as Rachel mentioned. And in terms of how to approach this demographic, I think it's not so much, I truly believe every single student, I have 4 kids myself, every single one of them is different. They all have their own special talents. Every kid is amazing, right, in their own. But just like kids that are deemed special ed, their body or their mind or parts of them are wired possibly differently. And that's the part where these kids with the capital G, these kids that are actually designated as a gifted student are deemed, their brains are wired differently. And it's not that, oh, he excels in math or she excels in English arts or an excellent musician. There's something about the way their brains are wired that is just different than a kid that's not considered gifted by the way it's defined. And the terminology is unfortunately poor in my opinion. But that's the part where I feel like this, and I feel like many of the people on the board are really partnering with this idea of how do we handle or approach these children with their minds who, if you get them in the right environment, these minds are just like they're just different. And I think there's a way to approach them from the emotional, social aspect. And I love, Larry always seems, I listened to Larry last night and today, and I think the word alone, my son is constantly feeling alone because he can't find other kids that think like him. And I'll leave it with this, that there's an element of, I know that the classrooms are put together in a heterogeneous way. A lot of the research I've seen is trying to cluster maybe 1 or 2 of the kids that are deemed gifted within a grade level within a school. Let these kids stop feeling like they're so alone and not the only ones that think this way. But I just wanted to kind of address that as it's not that these kids haven't, that they're extra special, it's that they're wired differently, and we need to figure out how to enrich these kids in the way that they're wired. I'll leave it at that. Sorry for being verbose.
Any comment before I go on to the
Yeah, I
next?
guess there wasn't a specific question there. I just wanted to kind of see how, that there feels like there is that definition, and like how there's the question for the administration and everyone is like really focusing on like this subset in terms of, it's not just it's not looking at, yes, everyone has it's this specific need for these children.
So, Ms. King, thank you for, and I didn't think it was verbose. I thought it was necessary. What you said, the social component of this is really, really important. I'm not going to say social isolation, but having friends, especially at the elementary level, if one does feel alone, and for whatever reason, but in the case of giftedness and maybe not connecting with others, that's something we have to do. We have to. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And in my previous life, when I was in another Nassau County school district as an assistant superintendent, I oversaw our gifted and talented program that we had there, still there, really heavily focused on the Renzulli model that Dr. Mioli shared earlier. And I remember back then that was a concern with some of the parents was, how do we have not only those, I won't say enrichment, but really pushing the envelope with them from a cognitive standpoint, but really making sure on the other end that they were socially and emotionally supported. So for whatever that's worth, duly noted, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Okay, the next person is Michelle Lamberti. Trying to get your speaker on. Hold on just a second. I'm working on it. Okay, you should be able to unmute.
Thanks, Deborah. Did that work?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hines and Dr. Muley and the whole board. My name is Michelle Lamberti, and I'm the parent of 2 SUSE students. So thank you to Dr. Muley, a 2nd grader and a 4th grader, and a 7th grade Weber student. And I will preface my comments by kind of a little bit of a different perspective. So both my husband and I are capital G, capital T kids. I kind of cringe to say that a little bit. But I loved what I heard today is I heard a lot about us thinking about the future and reimagining the future for all children. And I guess my comment is focused on questions is I would encourage us to be bold and to rethink the goals and implementation of our gifted program, particularly with respect to the elementary and 6th grade students. I'm excited to hear that we want to reimagine the future and focus on challenging more gifts and talents and children who are not manifesting those gifts and talents right away. I know that the last year has been really challenging and perceived as particularly disruptive and challenging for some STEAM core students. However, I think the availability of more enrichment instruction for all elementary students has been incredibly beneficial. And I would encourage the district to explore bold and innovative ways to focus and provide, what we've termed gifted and talented education equitably to all children. I was happy to hear that we want all children to be challenged kind of beyond that edge of their abilities. But then I heard that we can't do it every day for all students. And that definitely did give me a bit of pause. I do believe that each child deserves a challenging and enriching education, but the availability of preferential, high quality, small group instruction, I just don't believe that that should only be provided to a subset of students. Pull-out gifted programs are explicitly a segregated system of education where the de facto determining criteria, as was acknowledged on this call, is IQ and state test scores. I really do think this is a historical vestige and that even more segregated and inequitable learning environments that many of us encountered as children, right, where classes were tracked completely by ability. Dr. Miller made reference to historical tracking and the elimination of these in some high-performing countries and systems. And I just don't think that the tracking of elementary children who range in age from 8 to 12 in this manner is equitable or a good, to be honest, a good use of our district resources. I have no doubt that it benefits the few, but I really want us to be bold and think about why we can't create a program that more equitably benefits all. I think we either believe our teachers are capable of adequately enriching the experiences of all children, or we don't. And in either case, the special treatment for a few really can't be countenanced. Either specialized education is beneficial for some, but not all when we're nurturing academic gifts, talents, and creativity. I know this is the way we've always done it. I know that other districts have these programs, and I know there's a fear of how we'd be viewed if we didn't. But I do think that all of our children deserve the same level of academic engagement that can provide this environment for enrichment, but also can spur them to a lifetime of academic achievement. So I would just really encourage the district to think more broadly, and I think I heard echoes of that, of figuring out how we can do this, particularly with those younger kids, because I do think tracking at that age is problematic on probably socioeconomic, racial, and many other levels, but thinking about how we as a district want to be really bold and how we can do this more broadly for all of our students.
Thank you.
That was a
very
lot to unpack.
much. I just want to make sure I'm able to get to everybody on this list because we do have a bunch of hands raised. Did anybody want to comment on that?
Can I add one piece of information just in case anybody doesn't understand the full context of what Michelle is talking about? Because this year, generally we have PEP teachers, STEAM teachers who do push-in enrichment in each of the grades in the schools like in a non-COVID year, and also have a core group who are identified as, we don't call it gifted and talented. I agree with what Lauren King said, that the terminology is terrible at this point because of what it implies. But this past year, because of staffing for COVID, we couldn't do a core group of students. And so the PEP teachers instead did an additional special for the elementary students. So they cycled through, along with gym, art, music, physical education, art, music, library, also PEP /esteem/enrichment, I happen to think it's one of the silver linings of the pandemic, because I think I have thought, and a lot of us have thought, that there always should be more enrichment at the elementary level. I'm going to leave it there. I mean, I happen to have other thoughts on the core group, but I'm going to let Dr. Mealy and Dr. Hines address the question if they want to.
Yeah, I would. I just want to piggyback on what you just said and kind of throw a shout out to our elementary principals. You talk about making lemonade out of lemons. You know, we did that really to help pod the kids. And boy, everybody was really flexible. We really weren't sure how it would work out. And I think I think it's been very successful. And I'm kind of sad that we're losing it. So it's one of the things I'd like to look at. I'd like us to look at doing more of that while going back to, you know, some of the core group stuff, at least for now. And I loved what Ms. Lamberti had to say. I think, you know, I know that we are trying to do that bold work. And I have said several times to the board that I'm very thankful to be part of it and to be working with this board and the superintendent, because it's really important work.
I don't know if I could top whatever Dr. Mealy just said. What I can do is share my sentiments about what Mrs. Lamberti just said. I appreciate you bringing that perspective and clearly articulating why that may or is a good idea. You know, I pause by saying, you know, there are silver linings attached to COVID. But as Dr. Mealy intimated, actually more than intimated before, the one-on-one initiative is something that we moved in this direction, and I'm very proud of that. The second thing, as he just said before, was this enrichment for everyone. There's a lot that we learned, and how that has impacted our students I believe, in a profound way. And our PEP teachers have done an incredible job. So we need to now see how we can make this happen and continue that great work moving forward.
I think I won't say a lot, because I think the thing is that these are all, every issue of these is a canyon, right? There are deep levels of it. And so I think there's also implicit in the comments that Mrs. Lamberti made, there are the implied issues with identification as well. Because some of these issues are caused by the fact that some kids don't pop as early. Some kids are very hard to identify because they're not the traditional academically successful test takers. And I think that's implicit in what everything Dr. Mealy and Dr. Hines are saying, is that part of serving this population is reimagining how we serve them, and also making sure that we serve all of them, however we define them, that we're not losing the kids around the edges for this reason, and that we're identifying their various gifts and talents. As Dr. Mealy said, asynchronous development is pretty typical in the gifted and talented population. So it's not that every gifted and talented child is traditionally academically successful, fantastic in math, fantastic in English, plays the violin like a prodigy. There are children who are capital G gifted in one area. And I also want to note that there are implications for this, not just in elementary school, though, it's further up as well. I mean, we identify children for acceleration in earth science by having them take a test, and also looking at their English, social studies, math, and world language grades. And so that means you can't necessarily be a kid who's just able to accelerate in science. You have to also be academically successful in all of your other classes. And if I'm understanding correctly, these are the kind of things that once we have our mission and vision work, we may be looking at. I think we have a lot more.
We do have a lot.
So maybe we should try and blow through them.
And
I had a couple that were emailed too.
I would love to get to everybody in the viewing audience so they can answer their question. Rebecca Parker, I am going to allow you to speak. So you should be able to turn your mic.
Okay, did
There you go. Good. You're on.
Did I do it?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. I'll be very brief and hopefully won't talk too quickly because I have a lot to say, but I won't say all of it. I'll make one point about elementary and then one about high school. I have kids in both. I want to say that I totally agree that failure, I think was mentioned, Dr. Mioli, is super important. And I want to say that sometimes when we don't differentiate in the elementary school classes, we are not teaching some of the kids who are advanced learners in certain subjects how to fail. They just get 100% in all the, let's say, math tests or English tests, spelling tests, for example, and they're never pushed out of their comfort zone. And instead we have them tutor other kids, teach even the class, or get extra work packets or links without real meaningful explanation of those. And I've heard that over and over again here in this district. And those are, I would say, 2 red flags that Dr. Brown identified in her lecture about how we're actually not serving that population. So I completely understand the point that's been made that we want to serve everyone, but I actually think we have to think about how we're not serving those students when the classroom isn't differentiated, and how difficult it can be for those students, which is also connected to the social and like SEL problems those kids might be having when they do feel alone, when their needs aren't being met, and when they don't get to be pulled out in a core group with kids who are like them. And I will admit, have a 4th grader in the whole of testing, who we don't know what's happening with her. So I would, ask for some clarification, some more clarification that a lot of parents are wanting about how actually we are going to identify these kids. And I agree, it's a really hard task to do it, but I think a lot of parents want to know like how it's actually going to happen. And then quickly, I'll move on to the high school, which I think we've talked a lot today about how kids can be gifted in different areas. And that's definitely true. If you can be a great math student, not a great English student, not like English, love math, etc., vice versa. But I just want to point out, and I made this point before, and apologies for those who've heard it, but we offer accelerated math and science classes in 7th grade and 8th grade, math in 7th, science in 8th. We offer advanced art, for example, a very important thing in 8th grade. We differentiate music, I believe, in high school. In social studies, we offer an advanced class in 10th grade. In English, we do not offer a full year advanced class in English until 12th grade. In 11th grade, we make kids who like writing take a half, a 2 of 6 class on top of their regular English class. And I believe that this really disadvantages kids who are specifically gifted or even just really interested in one topic of English. And we've said so many times today that kids are different, like not a kid isn't gifted in everything, and we shouldn't be assuming they are or disadvantaging a kid who is gifted in one subject. And I think our high school curriculum is that way. And I know we have English honors projects, independent English honors projects that vary wildly in consistency as to how they're done. And since it's not the forum last night, I will inject my own view that these do not work often and do not give the same opportunities for kids in English that kids in math and science have. And we might be losing some kids who are good at English, perhaps not math and science, with this structure. So to recap, my first question is about elementary school, and my second, and identifying the PEP kids. And my second is about, will we look at a way to make English like math and science and art and music in terms of having kids who like it and are good at it in the same class together and not feel alone. Okay, sorry, I'll stop now.
So I can answer the IQ question, not 100%, but maybe 85%. We will be IQing those students who should have been IQ'd last year and who we already have identified as meeting the criteria to be IQ'd this year. We have an exact number of them in all 5 of the elementary schools. And I'm just trying to find the most cost-effective and valid and reliable way of doing that. There are 3 options on the table. I'm hoping to have an answer to the superintendent by early next week of exactly which one. But we will be moving forward with that for sure this spring.
Okay, I'm doing the best I can to get these, get everybody to be able to speak. Next is Nan Malconian. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Deborah. And thank you to everyone here. It's very exciting to see this conversation taking place. It's very, very important as these are students whose needs are outside the mainstream and need to be considered as the individual learners that they are. My one question is whether or not we are creating a strong, equitable, broad-based gifted program that meets the unique needs of these students. Is this a priority for our district?
So yeah, I could answer that. Well, I almost said nice to see you. I can't see you. Nice to hear from you. What I will say, yes, this is one of many priorities that we have as a school district. So meeting the needs of whether it's students who are gifted and talented or students who need extra supports is definitely in the wheelhouse and of priorities within the needs. But I think what's just as important is that as we move forward and we focus on our strategic plan after the vision and mission work is when we will really look at the nuts and bolts of if we have to change anything. And when I say change anything, it means either augment or shift some things. And what those things are, I have no idea because we haven't done that yet. But it's safe to say the program that was here before, and I've heard Dr. Mioli say this over and over, and I think the PEP teachers would say this too, we have a really good program. We have a really, really good program, but it may need to be tweaked over time. And that's what we're probably going to do after next year.
Okay, let's see. Next in line, we still have 4 people who would like to comment. GGB, who I'm going to safely assume is Mr. Borda. You should be able to speak. Should be able to unmute. Yes, good.
Okay. Everyone can hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. First of all, good morning, everyone. I think I'm pretty well known by all of you. As you know, a couple of years ago, a group of us created a group, Concerned Parents, mostly out of concern that our kids' abilities were not being recognized. The structure, whatever is going on in the schools. And I have to say at this point, thank very much Ms. Gilliard, Rachel, because her comments are right on the money. I also have to say this to Deborah Brooks. You might be surprised that I say this. We believe that tests are important, but they are not the end of everything. And we do agree with your comment just before that using test scores and this type of assessments to identify kids is not necessarily everything. We are concerned, as our name of our group is Concerned Parents, for the future and what the struggles will be and what options we will have to either take or do, because you know that we are very passionate. We will not let our kids to be ignored, not to receive equity and fairness. We will never ask for a favor or an extra, favor for anyone, but we want some change. All this talk about gift and talent, fine, we are for it. Our kids are gifted and talented. And as Dr. Hines, whom I have to recognize for all, he is into play and the mental health, and we are with him on that. He was able to recognize that some kids had to be allowed into programs that were being totally close to them. And now we proved that we were right. Those 6 kids that went into double skip were among the best kids in that class. And none of them had been recognized before. None. They were shown aside. As a matter of fact, one of them perhaps was the best student in double skip. this is the frustrating part for many of us. You know, we have no ambition to run for the board or to create problems and go around and create social networks. We just came to Port Washington, and as taxpayers, parents, and residents, we just want what is fair. We want a fair system to recognize our kids for what they are. It's not that we are so-called tiger parents, that we believe that our kids are geniuses when in fact they might not be. But I think Dr. Hines understands what I'm saying, and I want to say publicly here that not until Dr. Hines came to this district was any recognition of on the unrecognized students done. And I want to thank him, and also thank Rachel and whomever is on board for their movements toward this. But we're, as you can hear in my voice, we are very frustrated. You know, when we have asked for support, you know, everyone here talks about gifted and talented. When we have asked for support, the only support we have found out is among ourselves. So where is the gifted and talented, and everyone talks about this and that? Anyway, I just want to conclude with those comments. I do hope that the future will be a better one, because we are really concerned about the future for our kids in this district. And we'll see. Time will tell. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't know if our administrators want to comment. I want to be sure that we get to all the comments, but I'm also mindful of the time. So I will take my cue from the administrators and let you tell me if you can stay here for a little while longer. There are 4 people with their hands raised, and one of them is Larry Greenstein.
So I
Over
have
time.
about 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to say I appreciate Mr. Borda's sentiments. That's it.
Dr. Maioli, Dr. Shields, you okay hanging out for another 10 minutes? Okay, at least thumbs up. Okay, so without further ado, actually, Larry, why don't I take you? You've been waiting so patiently, and then I'll get to the remaining community comments.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on something as people started talking about secondary, which is important. Also, in the secondary schools, our program for advanced learners tends to be test-based AP classes, which is really more. And I'm just hoping that as we move on, we can find some way to bring more of an enrichment model into the high school rather than an acceleration model. And I think, you know, for the people who don't want to be tied into tests and don't want to be tied in there, but might like a subject a lot, I think there might be other things we can try to do for them.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments, or shall I go on to the next community comment? Okay, Kim Kaiserman, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to return to the issue of equity. I'm glad you're giving me a chance to do this. I know we're running over, but I think it's crucial not only in gifted education, but in everything that we do in education. But I'd like to focus the conversation a little bit more. Is there a plan to really study and update our identification procedures according to the recommendations of organizations like the NAGC, to make our identification procedures more equitable and create more diverse core group cohorts? Is there a plan for additional professional development in this area? And if there isn't a plan, I guess my question is there a plan to make a plan? And I don't mean that facetiously. I'm just trying to understand what our intentions are and what our priorities are. Thank you.
I think you're seeing the plan for the plan, and you're experiencing it. As I mentioned earlier, the program has changed, not only this year, but many of the years that I've been in Port Washington. I want to say every single year, but I may be off by one or two. And there have been attempts to broaden that pool, several. But I think you're seeing two very broad brushstroke changes here, one in access and equity and one in vision and mission. That will, one of which will be pulling into the station fairly quickly in the next month or so, vision and mission, and that will help us align our arrows and start to answer that question. The other, the equity and access work, I think is going to take a bit longer to gain traction, but certainly we're hoping that both of those lenses will help us to look at that issue, which is a very important issue, I know, to the board. It's one of their goals this year, to the superintendent, and to I think all of us.
I'll very quickly add, I appreciate the question, Ms. Kaiserman, because if we do look at our students who are in this core program, I think it's safe to say that there is some disproportionality or a lack thereof as far as a diverse student body that's there, and that's something we need to look at. And that may be in the assessment piece as far as how we go about doing that. But I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, thank you. Two more hands are raised. Next, Barbara Cohen. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you everyone for opening this discussion. It's a robust discussion. I'm the parent of a graduating senior in college who's a graduate of the Port Washington schools, and I was trained as a teacher with some focus in the area of gifted education. My concern would be in listening to the comments that evaluating children who are gifted, capital G, is a holistic assessment that only includes partially IQ testing. And IQ testing instruments have been developed over the years to address inequities that have been pointed out and will continue to be. So they are a valuable tool, but they're only one tool in the toolbox that's available to us. I do not think it's appropriate at all to talk about eliminating services for the capital G gifted students as in an exchange for push-in enrichment for all students. Both should happen, because just to provide push-in enrichment does not provide equity for the capital G population that we have. We would not justify eliminating services for any other population in order to better serve the whole, but we do it with gifted students, capital G, all the time. If we have identification issues, then it's up to our administration and the Board of Education and the gifted teachers to address those, not by taking away services, because those gifted students are here, whether we provide services for them or not. We need to improve our holistic assessment. And that is a comment, but with that, I'm wondering if there are gifted trained teachers currently sitting at the table for mission and vision and for diversity and inclusion. Because if that's an oversight, then it's an equity oversight. And I would like to hear that they are, so that this perspective can be represented. Thank you, and thank you for this open discussion.
I could answer. Thank you, Ms. Cohen. We do have gifted teachers. I know we have one on the equity committee. Thank you, Dr. Shields, for nodding your head. And I know which one as well. So as far as the vision and mission, I would have to go to the list and see if that's the case. But points well taken. Thank you.
Okay, another hand went up. Dina Morrow. Hold on a second, let me unmute you. You should be unmuted now. Gina, you're not unmuted, sorry. Try again?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Oops. My bad. You're gonna have to unmute yourself again, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. So some of what Barbara just said was what I was anticipating talking about, but also I want to just express that I really hope that when Dr. Hines says that we're going to tweak this program, that he means, and that we're thinking about adding more, because this program has been stripped away through the years, and we had a lot of new people at the table. So a lot of what I'm going to say has been said throughout the years, but just to kind of get everybody on the same page, from what I understand, PEP started off with everybody getting enrichment, and that was a way that the PEP teacher was also able to identify beyond these tests and be able to work with the whole student body in the building. And there would be one PEP teacher per building. So I see a lot of value in that. And it's what Michelle was saying, it's felt everywhere. That is a great model, but again, not at the expense of the core group going in. Dr. Muley, the first time that you and I actually really spoke was when I was in tears in your office about 10 years ago, when my son was really having a hard time because he was starting to wither in the classroom because he was just not engaged anymore. And so we went to CW Post, and that's when I got on this path. I didn't know anything about this, and I was an educator. So that was a real eye-opening moment for me too. How many students did I let come through my own classroom that I somewhat failed? And so I'm coming from that perspective also of an educator who works with teachers. And from what I hear from many teachers is they don't really know how to serve these kids. We're all about differentiating, but what do I do with the higher kids? So PD is important. Having the staff, maybe when you're hiring new teachers, having them have that background, having each building staffed with a PEP teacher, keeping the enrichment for all while maintaining the core group, and of course extending other opportunities for identification. So those are my 2 cents, and I'm really hopeful that we can get there.
Is any reply to that, or shall I move on? Okay.
Well, I'll just say, yeah, I appreciate those comments, and I do remember. I don't know what I said, but there are 2 comments in a row that sound like you heard me say we were getting rid of the core, but that's not what I meant to say, if that's what I said. Well, what I meant to say was that the real strong enrichment that's happened this year during COVID by necessity for another necessity, I think has shown us, again, a silver lining, something that was really a great paradigm, and that I would like to see continue in addition to the core. So if I wasn't clear about that, I hope I am now.
Okay, fine. The last hand, Lauren.
Hi, yes, sorry. So to piggyback on what Dina said, just to come from a different perspective as a parent, also not having giftedness on my radar at all, and feeling like it's something that you wait for the school to tell you about your child. And me starting in kindergarten, having conversations with the teachers, thinking that my kid sort of, quote unquote, thinks differently or has a different way of approaching things, and kind of waiting for them to tell me something like, yes, your child may be gifted, he may have special, this or that, and not hearing it. And then with my mental health background, coming from the perspective thinking, okay, this kid has an executive function problem, and going to the school and trying to speak to the psychologist and having him tested, and no one along the way, in terms of identification and recognition, no one mentioning to me that perhaps the child is gifted in some way, and looking at his test scores only until 3rd grade, when I think then officially, people are then ready, staff is ready to say the words, or officially recognize on the topic of being, children being recognized and identified, then all of a sudden, oh, okay, this is what's happening. when I feel like, you know, for all of those years before, it could have been on my radar. I could have been supporting him. I could have been doing something else. And I was even asking, you know, what can I be doing for him? But I really felt in hindsight now that there was a hesitancy to say anything about giftedness or any kind of special abilities or anything like that. So I was very glad to hear today, you know, speaking about teachers being more on the lookout for students' talents, for their abilities. That, I mean, I'm very glad for that. I just wanted to say that, you know, in hindsight, I can see now there was hesitancy to say anything along those lines to me, even when I was asking and speaking to the psychologists and the principal and the teachers. So I just wanted to put that out there as parents. You know, this is not on our radar, as Dina said, and she was an educator. And also the hesitancy of the parents to say, hey, do you think my kid is gifted? You know, it's just kind of an awkward thing and waiting for the school to tell me. So I just wanted to put that out there and just to say that I'm glad that it's being discussed, that teachers, you know, may be looking for these things, and to have a conversation with the parents about how they can support the kids at home or supplement what's going on in school.
Okay, thank you. I know we're at 11:48. I'm incredibly mindful of that. I believe there was an email sent for a comment, and another hand went up. So I'm taking my lead again from our administrators. You tell me what is comfortable for you in your schedule, and we will act accordingly.
Well, I already said I have an 11:45 that I'm already late for. So,
Yeah,
you're spearheading the meeting.
So, you know, if we just keep going, I'll be. Why don't we take the email, since it sounded like Rachel had that early on, unless
She did.
and so let's wrap up with that. I think she had said she had two even, but
It's
I can
actually,
handle those two, and then I think.
and I think that we could just read them so that everybody can think about them too. Actually, it's two comments from Jessica Mawani, who apologized for having to leave early. The first was, how do we identify giftedness in ENL students and ensure we are serving them in ways that challenge their other capabilities while they pursue mastery of the language? Second question, connected, I think you can answer them both at once, is how do we identify giftedness in students with special needs, particularly those whose needs may hamper their abilities to perform up to ability on standardized IQ tests? For example, there are aspects of IQ testing that require manual manipulation of materials, which a student receiving OT may be able to process cognitively, but not physically. Same for visual perceptual issues that impact processing speed, which is a traditional component of IQ and giftedness, but doesn't offer a complete picture of the child. And she also added, thanks so much for this discussion. I'm looking forward to seeing how the thinking underway translates to action.
Okay, great. Oh, sorry.
You want to say something? Go ahead.
No, Dr. Muriel, I did not realize you were going to speak, but you have the floor.
Well, I just want to acknowledge that this is the flip side of, you know, some of the other comments that we've gotten and some of the concerns, you know, about how much tweaking is going to be done, you know, to the current system that we're going back to in September. And so it's a kind of a fitting ending, because I think it gives us the bookends that we need to fill in that bookshelf in between. I mean, I don't know the answer to either of those questions. I don't know how we identify ENL kids, you know, right now. I think what I do know is that I don't think we're doing it. And I think that we need to, that's part of the broadening experience that I'm hoping that aligning the arrows will do.
Yeah, those are great questions by Mrs. Milani. What we need to do is to bring our new ENL director in, Mrs. Arate, and certainly bring in Dr. Allen to address that and tap into their expertise so we could develop a plan for that. Really good points.
Can I just, since I don't have to be unmuted, note one other thing, and I don't expect anybody to comment on it, but I want to throw it out there. I think part of our problem always with gifted and talented education is funding. And New York State is actually really behind a lot of other states. So there are states, for anybody who's familiar with this, there are states that have funded mandates for gifted and talented education, where the state says, you must do this for these students, and here's the money to do it with. You have states that have a mandate that is unfunded, where they say you must do this to serve this population, but figure out how to pay for it yourself. And then you have states with no mandate and no funding. And New York State falls into this last category. And I know I've been shocked when I've looked at, you can look up the which states fall into which category. And there are states that I would have stereotyped as being really poor in education, that have funded mandates for gifted education, or gifted students get IEPs, like Larry had thrown out about giving IEPs to kids based on their needs. I'm wondering, this is a rhetorical out there wondering, and we can table it for another time. We have a legislative task force in the Board of Education that has done a lot of really important work. There are community members on it as well. And I'm wondering if this isn't something that our legislative task force should be thinking about tackling, adding to its list of things that we're talking to New York State about, because of course, all things are possible with funding. I agree with everybody's note that the enrichment for all in the elementary school was fantastic. And I would love it if we could find a way to keep that and still have the core group.
Okay, mindful of everybody's time. The one person who has the hand raised, I think about 5 minutes ago, way after we were supposed to end. So if you could please just send your comment to the board and to Dr. Mioli and Dr. Hines so they can answer it. I'm sorry, we won't be able to read it into the record. Where the policy committee is concerned, if anybody on the committee thinks that the NYSPA template needs to be merged with the current template that we have, or the current policy we have, or if we need to review it, we'll bring it back in a separate policy committee meeting. We don't have to reconvene everybody here. I have nothing further from my end. I thank everybody, Dr. Mioli, for your wonderful presentation. Dr. Hines for being here and extending your time. Dr. Shields for being here and extending your time. That's all I have to say. So Rachel, if you want to close it.
Thank you all. I think this, like many of our conversations, will be an ongoing conversation once we have the mission and vision and we move into a strategic plan and a profile of the graduate. I think we'll be discussing this further. But thank you everybody for coming. If anybody from the public has further comments, you're always welcome to email the administration and also the Board of Education at BOE@portnet.org. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day. And administrators, thank you for staying longer and being late for other meetings for this.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.